What kind of adult will he become? Today, my grandchild Matthew injured an underclassman at school. But he doesn't seem to be remorseful at all. He acts purely on his emotions and has no idea how to control his anger. At this rate, he might end up doing something truly irreversible. That night, in the quiet bedroom where only the sound of the air purifier could be heard, I was looking down at him. I could hear his faint breathing. I watched him sleeping with a peaceful and innocent expression, looking so adorable. Suddenly, I became aware of the cold knife in my right hand, and my heart froze. Staring at the sharp blade, thoughts of wanting to free him from his suffering raced through my mind. Clenching my teeth, I gripped my wrist, holding the knife tightly with my other hand. Love, hate, sadness, so many emotions mixed together, and I didn't know what to do anymore. Trying desperately to calm my trembling body and erratic breathing, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore. I raised the knife above Matthew with both hands. This is the only way. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My name is Mary. Now, I live with just my husband Jason. Jason is about to retire soon, so he always finishes work on time. We eat dinner together leisurely at home and go for walks together on weekends, enjoying peaceful days. We are both healthy, our house is paid off, and our children are independent. During this time, I never doubted that my old age would be positive and fulfilling. My daughter Rebecca works in fashion and travels for work frequently, both domestically and mainly to Europe, working very hard. She decided when she was young that she wouldn't get married. It's not a matter of being strong-willed. I truly respect her, who lives with pride in her work. On the other hand, my son Kevin has been living in the neighboring town since he got married at the age of 28. Kevin and his wife Nicole didn't have children for about 10 years after they got married. It seemed that Nicole was more troubled by this than Kevin was. I don't think children are something to rush, it'll happen eventually. Sometimes, when they visited us, Kevin would bring up the topic of not having children. He spoke as if it were someone else's problem. There was no need to mention it himself. But if they hadn't had children for 10 years, maybe they were being asked about it by others. Jason and I pretended not to be particularly interested. As long as they were happy together, that was enough. Nicole is always telling me not to drink or stay up late. She's like my mom, it's annoying. Nicole would smile shyly and look down next to Kevin. Not drinking and not staying up late, I felt like Nicole's wishes were embedded in those words, even if Kevin didn't notice. 10 years must have felt long. The day Kevin and Nicole told us they were expecting a baby. When was that, I wonder? Kevin and Nicole used to visit us once a month, but suddenly they stopped coming over, and I felt a bit uneasy. When they finally visited again after a few months, Kevin seemed embarrassed, so I thought something was up. Well, Nicole is pregnant. Finally. Nicole's belly wasn't very big yet, so she didn't look like she was in the stable period of pregnancy. But seeing Nicole's gentle and kind smile as she lovingly patted her belly, I couldn't help but cry. What's wrong, Mary? No, it's just strange. It's not like I'm sad. I'm happy. I really am happy. Once again, I repeated in my heart that I was happy. I couldn't put it into words, but I was truly glad that Nicole was having a baby. The look on her face as she rubbed her belly was the happiest I'd ever seen her, and I had a feeling I'd never forget that expression for the rest of my life. The 2 babies born were named Matthew. I felt deep in my heart that the name Matthew suited my beloved grandchild's smiling face. Nicole's parents lived far away, so she decided to stay with us for a while instead of going back to her own home. It had been a long time since I held a baby, and the sensation was so soft that it scared me to hold him. I let out a small cry as I held the fragile life in my arms and gazed at Matthew's expression. You raised me and my sister just fine, so why are you so scared to hold him? Well, it's different when it's someone else's child. The thought of even accidentally hurting him scares me. I said with a nervous laugh, using every bit of my strength to support him with my arms. The tension was entirely different from when I raised Kevin and Rebecca. Sleeping in my arms, Matthew was fragile, delicate, and yet so beautiful. He grew steadily. When he turned 4, he developed a great love for encyclopedias and would devour the books he borrowed from the library. Kevin would always proudly report this to us. "At this rate, he'll probably become a scholar or something. He can follow any path he loves. As long as he's happy, that's all that matters," Nicole said, smiling at young Matthew. As I watched her profile, I wished from the bottom of my heart that this happiness would last forever. One day, the phone rang. Jason, having retired, spent most of his days at home with no particular hobbies, so he quickly answered the phone when it rang. "Hello?" Jason answered warily, suspecting a scam or telemarketing call. I was watching TV. It was an ordinary day. Holding the receiver to his ear, Jason quietly looked at me, and even though our eyes met, he continued to stare at me without looking away. From his lifeless eyes, I sensed that something terribly bad had happened. The call that came on an ordinary day informed us that Nicole and Matthew had been in an accident and were taken to the hospital. They were apparently on their way home from kindergarten. I imagined Nicole talking to Matthew, holding hands as they walked home. Maybe discussing what to have for dinner or planning to do some drawing at home. They approached the crosswalk, checked the signal, and started to cross. It was all in my imagination, but it felt incredibly real. A car driven by someone who had fallen asleep at the wheel. The two of them being thrown into the air. The moment they hit the ground, Nicole instinctively cradled Matthew's head. Jason and I, having received the call from Kevin, went to the hospital where they were taken and sat silently in the waiting room. The image of Nicole and Matthew being hit by a car replayed in my mind over and over again, and I covered my face many times. Why did this have to happen? Eventually, the doctor told us that Nicole had died. Kevin was speechless, standing motionless in the stark hallway with a fixed expression. Only Matthew survived, but there was a possibility of him having a traumatic brain injury, but it seemed Kevin didn't hear the doctor's words at all. When I took Jason's hand, he too was staring into space with his mouth slightly open. Before the feeling of sadness could well up, the funeral arrangements began to proceed. When Nicole's funeral ended, Kevin asked if I could take Matthew in. "I'm sorry, just for a little while. With Nicole gone, I just need some time alone to think." While you're thinking alone, what about Matthew's feelings? I couldn't bring myself to ask that as Kevin seemed so downhearted. Matthew, diagnosed with a brain injury, had lost his previously calm demeanor and had become prone to outbursts and violence. At first, I thought the sadness and loneliness of losing Nicole had changed Matthew's personality, but it might not be that simple. Matthew's brain injury had caused cognitive dysfunction, and none of us Jason, Kevin, or I could understand him. He would yell, break furniture, throw things, and sometimes even hit me. Kevin and Jason would observe from a distance, frowning, and then leave the house to avoid the situation. My worries continued until Matthew exhausted himself and fell asleep after his outbursts. During these difficult days, only Rebecca, who lived far away, called me every day to check on me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm overseas now, but I'll definitely visit when I get back to the States." Hearing Rebecca's voice softened my heart a bit. I am of an age where society calls me elderly. Living with a young and violent grandson was mentally and physically exhausting. Days like a storm with Matthew continued, and the start of elementary school was approaching. During kindergarten, Matthew caused problems with his violence and harsh words, and I kept apologizing repeatedly. I wondered if I had ever apologized so much in my life. At first, everyone spoke sympathetic words, but gradually, people began to avoid Matthew and me. Even the moms who had been Nicole's friends started to avoid us, deepening our isolation. The kindergarten teachers made various accommodations, but Matthew, unable to move his body as freely as the other children, was always frustrated. When I went to pick him up from kindergarten, He would watch an active boy balancing on the balance beams. The boy, with his handsome face, would balance confidently on the beams, clapping and laughing with his friends. "Grandma, watch me." Matthew tried hard to balance. No matter how many times he tried, he kept falling. Seeing this, the confident boy began to mimic him. The boy pretended to fall from the balance beams as a joke. The boy who had effortlessly balanced earlier now mimicked Matthew's movements and laughed with his friends. Eventually, losing interest in Matthew, the boys laughed and moved on to other playground equipment with their friends. Matthew, with tears welling up in his eyes, "Grandma, watch me," he said, hitting me in the stomach. Sometimes, Matthew's violence extended to other children. I told Kevin that it might be better for him to attend a special education class in elementary school. But Kevin, and even Jason, opposed the idea. "Matthew has some hysterical moments, but he doesn't need a special education class." Special education is for kids with disabilities, right? I don't know. Is he that bad? Cognitive dysfunction is not easily noticeable. Kevin and Jason don't seem to understand the severity of the situation since they spend so little time with him. I've repeatedly explained how his outbursts cause trouble for those around him, and more importantly, how much pain he himself is in. But they refuse to accept it. It seems to me that they close their eyes to the fact that their beloved grandson, their son, sweet Matthew, is disabled. As time went on, Matthew's violent behavior became more severe as he grew. Even though bruises appeared on my arms and thighs, Kevin and Jason turned a blind eye. I even tried to seek help from social services to address this situation. But when I approached them, they insisted that the father must come to the office. Kevin showed no understanding of his disability and probably didn't even know the term high-functioning autism. Every day, I received calls from the school and apologized to countless people. Days when no one would help me. Matthew was always irritated, pulling my hair and continuing his violent actions. I was extremely exhausted. I was so drained that I even lost the desire to seek help from anyone. One day, when Matthew was in 4th grade, he seriously injured an underclassman at school. I heard the details from his homeroom teacher. Apparently, Matthew pushed the younger boy while climbing the stairs. Other students witnessed the incident, confirming that it was indeed Matthew's doing. Even when I asked Matthew for his reasoning, he couldn't explain, and the teacher was at a loss as well. I immediately rushed to apologize to the injured child's home. I rang the doorbell and, seeing the parents' faces, I apologized repeatedly. The boy had suffered a broken bone. At the doorway, "Why didn't the child or his parent come along?" the injured boy's parent yelled at me. The boy, with tears streaming down his face. "It hurt so much. I was so scared," accused me. I kept apologizing over and over. The boy's father said, "Why is a kid like that in a regular class?" Those words pierced my heart, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Back at home, I cooked dinner in the kitchen. While making his favorite vegetable soup, I cut the carrots into small pieces for easier eating. Matthew, clumsily holding the spoon, tried to eat the finished soup. The spoon fell from his hand multiple times, and eventually, in his frustration, he threw the spoon at me. Feeling an emotion that was neither anger nor sadness, I handed Matthew a new spoon and quietly looked at his face. What kind of adult will he become? Even if he hurts someone, he doesn't seem to reflect on his actions. He acts purely on his emotions and doesn't know how to control his anger. If this continues, Matthew might end up doing something truly irreversible. That night, in the quiet bedroom where only the sound of the air purifier could be heard, I looked down at Matthew. I heard his faint breathing, staring at Matthew's peaceful and innocent face as he slept. I suddenly felt the coldness of the knife I was holding in my right hand. As I gazed at the sharp blade, thoughts of wanting to free Matthew from his suffering raced through my mind. I clenched my teeth and tightly gripped my wrist with my free hand, holding the knife. Filled with mixed emotions of affection, hatred, and sadness. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Trying to calm my trembling body and ragged breathing, I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore. Holding the knife with both hands, I raised it above Matthew. This is the only way. I have no other choice. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Hey! What are you doing, Mary?
Suddenly, Jason burst into the room, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of the knife in my hand. I froze, turning to face Jason. Jason, terrified by the unexpected scene, stood motionless at the doorway, staring at me with wide eyes. My hand trembled, and doubt began to fill my heart. It must have been only a few seconds. Kevin, appearing behind Jason, rushed past him with a desperate look and threw himself over Matthew. If I lowered the knife now, I would stab Kevin. Kevin's face twisted in fear as he looked at me. Mom, please, stop. Matthew, who had just woken up, looked around in confusion, his eyes wide with shock. He didn't say a word, just stared at me silently through the gap in Kevin's body. I wondered how I looked in Matthew's eyes right now. Seeing Matthew's unusually clear eyes brought me back to my senses. I slowly placed the knife on the floor and left the room without saying a word. My body felt incredibly heavy. Oh, why does my body feel so heavy? In the living room, I picked up my smartphone and called the police. My heart was crushed by despair and regret. I wanted someone to punish me for what I was about to do, for the terrible thing I almost did. If no one stopped me now, I felt I would repeat the same mistake again. The police officer who answered asked what was wrong. I couldn't say anything, just watched the hands of the clock on the wall move.
Mary, hang up the phone.
Jason followed me, looking at me with a pained expression. I lost my strength, letting the smartphone fall from my ear as tears streamed down my face. It's okay, Mary. Nothing happened. Isn't that enough? Tears fell from my eyes, landing at my feet. Staring at the spots where my tears hit the floor, I mustered the strength to put the smartphone back to my ear. I tried to hurt my grandchild. I'm so sorry. I lifted my face. Jason, in front of me, looked like he was about to cry. If you were going to make that face, I wish you had noticed sooner. Jason walked up to me and hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "It's not too late. Tell the police it was a mistake." Jason murmured in pain. I pushed away from Jason's chest and forced a smile. I didn't need a mirror to know. I was surely smiling horribly. No. If you and Kevin hadn't come, I would have. A few minutes later, several police officers arrived at the house and I was arrested. As I was taken away in the police car, I kept my eyes closed. Reflecting deeply on my crime, I remembered his eyes looking at me. Remembering his innocent eyes, tears began to flow from the corners of my closed eyes. At the police station, I was taken to a room where a young female officer asked me questions. The questioning continued for days, and I talked in as much detail as possible. Feeling the weight of my guilt, I even wished to be sent to prison. The officer listened intently with a sympathetic expression. When I struggled to find words, "It's okay, take it slow," she gently said. An unexpected lawyer came to visit me, earnestly listening to my life story. "It's all right. I can stay in prison for the rest of my life." The lawyer gave me a slightly troubled smile. He advised me not to forget that there are people who are desperately trying to defend me. I tried to hurt my grandson. My feelings at that time were not just a momentary lapse. If I return to life with Matthew, it will surely happen again someday. After spending 3 days in the detention center, I was to return home. Rebecca was waiting in the police station parking lot. I was surprised that my guardian was Rebecca instead of Jason or Kevin, but I was genuinely glad it was her. I was also surprised that Rebecca, who was supposed to be living abroad, had returned, but she immediately ran to me and hugged me tightly when she saw me. "Mom, it was tough, wasn't it? But it's okay now." "Rebecca, what about your job?" "Don't worry about that. It's not important." Rebecca's warmth was so gentle that I lost my words, overwhelmed with emotion. Without saying anything or asking anything, she put me in the passenger seat and drove off without mentioning the destination. After driving for a while, a huge lake that looked like the sea spread out before us. The blue, clear lake reflected the surrounding mountains, creating a mystical atmosphere.